my last Fire Emblem Fortunes Weave video, I went into great depth talking about Fire Emblem haters, people who are openly against the series, who hate everything about it, who get frustrated and annoyed every single time this franchise is shown off in a Nintendo Direct. These guys are becoming kind of a meme. People are kind of clowning on them. One of them in particular got a lot of flack on Twitter. So it seems as if more and more people are beginning to notice the stereotypes when it comes to Fire Emblem critics. They're mostly Super Smash Bros. Fans. They don't actually know anything about the franchise or the IP or the fan base. They are just upset that another anime RPG is coming to Nintendo consoles. And every single time this happens, more and more people start condemning them for behaving this way, because at the end of the day, you are complaining about a Japanese property looking like an anime. So forgive me if your entire reason for being upset kind of falls apart from the onset, okay? I don't like you. I don't respect you. I don't want to hear your takes. That was nonsense. And rightfully so. This was the main talking point for Fire Emblem's Fortunes Weave, because if it hadn't been for the initial backlash to this announcement, this would have been a far more hype thing to begin with. Right now, we're still in that weird period where people are still trying to gaslight you into thinking that nobody is talking about Nintendo Switch 2 and nobody's buying the console or cares about any of the upcoming games. So expect a lot of downplaying for every single new Nintendo game that comes out in the next year or so. Fortune's Weave included. In fact, Fortune's Weave very well may be the game that breaks the cycle. We'll see, but at this point, there's definitely a big push to try and gaslight people into thinking Nintendo has fallen off, or that they're insane, or that they don't know what they're doing, or that they don't have any upcoming games to look forward to. There are so many examples of this. It's really hard to keep track of them. And as a result of that, because I was so busy talking about people who hate Fire Emblem Fortunes Weave, I didn't really talk about people who love Fire Emblem. And of course, I'm not talking about people who are excited about the game, who are looking forward to it, who are buying Switch 2s for it, because we all know those people exist. We've heard a lot from them. I have nothing bad to say about those people at all. They're great. I am a Fire Emblem fan. I picked up a Switch 2 because I knew that a Fire Emblem game would be coming out on it eventually. There is a weird subsection of Fire Emblem fans, quote unquote, who constantly gaslight and attack newer games in the series because allegedly they fell off after Awakening, which is, of course, the game that made the series mainstream worldwide. There is this huge, weird countercultural movement of people who are just obsessed with hating Awakening, hating modern Fire Emblem, and just religiously kind of just going after everything the series does, even though this series is bigger than ever and has been putting out nothing but bangers for over a decade. These are the fake Fire Emblem fans. The old school people who insist that they loved the old Fire Emblem games, even though before 7, none of them came out in America. These are the people who just push this line that they're so hardcore that the casual, modern Nintendo games can't hold a candle to the old ones, even though plenty of the old ones are very dated and don't really have a lot of replay value and don't really have the same sophistication that modern Fire Emblem games do. There's this mindset that the old games were better, overall, and that the new games are just universally terrible. And that could not be further from the truth. My favorite Fire Emblem game is still Fire Emblem 9, Path of Radiance. I still think that's the best one with the best pacing, with the best gameplay, with the best character story play. It's the game that made me love Fire Emblem. So 9 is my favorite. However, 10 Radiant Dawn was a very disappointing follow-up that really botched all of the build-up from Path of Radiance, like ruined lots of key characters, and just made lots of really strange, bizarre decisions. Awakening was a huge improvement over that. Three Houses really pushed boundaries when it came to storytelling and RPGs. And Engage has some of the best map design in the franchise. Engage is an extremely fun strategy game to play. So what this means is that even if you're a fan of older Fire Emblem games, like there's really no discounting the new ones because all of them are radically different. All of them take different approaches with different characters and feels and just mechanics, and all of them like have very, very devoted fans. Essentially, the cope that Fire Emblem has fallen off has been present since Awakening, which is coincidentally the one that became super popular. This is very, very, very stereotypical Pretendo behavior. This idea that once a game takes off, becomes mainstream, becomes popular, oh, we can't like it anymore because normies like it. Never mind the fact that the people who like Fire Emblem now can't really be considered normies under any stretch of the imagination. What people are upset about is that Fire Emblem is different now, and I don't like different. Or I think more accurately, they were never really fans to begin with. Because I think it's perfectly reasonable to see how modern Fire Emblem became what it was, how it began to expand the characters more and more and give them a unique kind of role to play in the setting and the world. Fire Emblem 1 kind of had your units be disposable and, expected them to die, but in modern FE, they all have pretty fleshed out personalities, backstories, and relationships with other characters. Fire Emblem has evolved. And not only is that not a bad thing, it's a very good thing. But there seems to be this strange insistence among a certain demographic of people who just refuse to understand that modern FE could have any value whatsoever. So you're seeing a lot of people say that they're not picking up a Switch 2 for Fortune's Weave, that they're going to play it at a friend's house, which is basically code for pirating it. They're going to do everything they can to just kind of keep up this facade that they're hardcore fans of the series without actually having to commit to playing it on an actual Nintendo Switch 2. I've seen this numerous times. I've seen people who claim to be huge Fire Emblem fans just refuse to play games like Awakening or Three Houses for very petty reasons. And it really reminds me a lot of what happened with Zelda back in the 90s, where it really blew up with Ocarina of Time, where it had the most successful video game ever made, the best, most critically acclaimed and video game of all time, Ocarina of Time, and every single follow-up after that was always treated as if it couldn't quite live up to it, and it could never really live up to the legacy. In a lot of ways, Zelda became a victim of its own success. And that wasn't really fair or warranted because real fans stuck with the series no matter what and enjoyed all the games for what they were. But, the mindset that people had that, oh man, Zelda's fallen off. It's not competitive anymore. I'd rather play Grand Theft Auto. It was completely misplaced because Zelda not only continued to be relevant and dominate, it eventually grew and revolutionized itself again with Breath of the Wild and is now the most popular open world fantasy game in the world. Beating out something like The Elder Scrolls and Elden Ring by a wide margin, to the point where I fully expect the live action movie to be bigger than Lord of the Rings. So with all that being said, can we all agree that the attitude towards Fire Emblem in general is just ridiculous? Not just the haters who would reject the game no matter what, but among so-called fans who are overly critical of things that nobody cares about. For example, a lot of people are complaining about the Three Houses elements in this, right? Oh, I wanted something different. You mean something like Engage, the game that came out immediately before this? Like, do you mean something like Fates and Awakening? Like, what exactly do you mean? Like anybody with two brain cells to rub together knew that Nintendo would be doing more things with Three Houses after the massive success of the original release and of Three Hopes. And seeing like a proper sequel after all this time is a very exciting thing for me personally. Three Houses is one of my favorite games on Switch and something I love dearly and just really love and appreciate. So seeing more of that is a very exciting thing for me. But at the same time, I also loved Engage for how it was a more traditional Fire Emblem experience that return to like the traditional black and white morality aspect that really felt more like something that younger players could get into. I think Engage was actually a pretty smart move on Nintendo's part for an anniversary title. I think Engage really did a lot to kind of keep Fire Emblem from regressing into just being a generic dark fantasy series. And I think that was something that they desperately needed. Some of these Fire Emblem fans, though, a lot of them are just complaining about the series on principle. They don't have any experience with these games. They don't know anything about them. Like they'll give you something vague, like, "Oh, I haven't played the series since Awakening," or like, "Fate censored it," like, and I haven't played a game since. Like they don't really understand this, and I do think this needs to be spelled out. People who started with Awakening now have more experience with Fire Emblem than people who started with Fire Emblem 7 back in 2003 because more games have come out in between this that span the past 10 years than there were in between 2003 and Awakening's release. We've gotten more variety in more Fire Emblem games than we did in that period. And if you go back further and start comparing modern FE to 1 through 6, what you'll find is a bunch of simplistic, dated games that just can't compete with what was coming after the fact. The simple fact of the matter is, Fire Emblem almost universally is seen as this, like, as currently being in its golden age period, where it's this huge cultural phenomenon, Nintendo IP. I think Nintendo themselves has said it's their top 5 most profitable series ever. Like you have this huge cultural phenomenon that a lot of people outside of Nintendo's core demographic are enthusiastic about. And yet these people want to gaslight you and think that like these games are falling off or that they're not as good as they used to be or that like they were never good to begin with. Oh, but we're totally the real fans though. We're hardcore fans. We were there from the beginning. It's a cope. It really is a gigantic cope. And I really do think like going forward that modern FE fans really need to start like speaking down to these people because they are I wouldn't even call them a vocal minority, but like they are a minority of people that desperately want their opinion to be taken as valid, even though a lot of them don't own Switch 2s, a lot of them don't play modern FE, and a lot of them don't really understand the core appeal of the series. In a lot of ways, I feel as if their attachment to the series basically boils down to the fact that it was considered a difficult IP back in the day, a hardcore video game for hardcore gamers, rather like Metroid. And now that it's popular, they casualized it. They ruined it. It's completely out of touch. And I do think that gamers probably should speak out against this. Like cuz this was tiring even when Awakening was brand new because we all knew it wouldn't stand the test of time, that Fire Emblem would keep growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And even after the missteps of the past couple of years, like Fire Emblem Fates, Tokyo Mirage Sessions not being that popular, like Engage being kind of a weird entry. Like the series has still maintained its relevancy and success. There has been no major drop off in Fire Emblem's relevancy this past 10 years. Like the entire hope that Awakening would be a one-off success has completely fallen through on this point. This is now an IP that people look forward to every Nintendo Direct. And it needs to be understood that people who stand by this mindset that the old games were better and nothing is ever going to change that are essentially living in a bubble, because nobody who plays all of these games is going to universally agree that pre-awakening Fire Emblem is better than post-awakening. Like that's just the reality of it. Anyone who's played all of these games will tell you that they do develop and get better over time. I think it's safe to say at this stage that Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave is actually now one of my most anticipated Nintendo Switch 2 games. I expect this is going to do way better than Dusk Floods. It's going to do way better than whatever else like major RPG is coming out on Switch 2 in that period. I expect this game to be an absolute bombshell, especially if it improves on the Three Houses formula. And what I'm curious about is just how much longer these certain toxic fans can continue this mentality that the series has fallen off and it just isn't living up to its reputation. I don't see it. I don't see anybody who's actually played these games and engaged with them in any meaningful capacity saying this about the IP. The only people who are saying this today are the sort of people who would try and tell you that Nintendo peaked with Super Mario Bros. 3. They are the equivalent of the NES boomers. They are no different than Sean Malmstrom or Mike Matei, who just constantly live in the past and don't really understand what people play and enjoy today. Like that's the reality of it, is that I think Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave is going to be a huge success, but how exactly are these fake Fire Emblem fans going to deal with that? I imagine they're going to do what they've always done, is just plug their ears and insist that the IP is failing, that it's not as good as it used to be, that the originals will always hold out and stand the test of time as all-time classics, while the rest of us just enjoy Fire Emblem. And I think what's worse for their argument is that a lot of us do play the older games as well. So I think it's become really clear that the people who enjoy Fire Emblem actually play all of the games. They don't just sit there and start like making up some fabricated time frame, that some cutoff date that demonstrates that Fire Emblem stopped being good after a certain point. Like that's not how it works. You know, like Fire Emblem is continuing. It is still getting new games. They are innovating and evolving and doing new exciting things. And we as fans have to acknowledge that.